Hello, listening squirrels. We have Chapter 10 of A Body in the Library. Superintendent Harper stood looking at the charred and twisted heap of metal. A burnt-up car was always a revolting object, even without the additional gruesome burden of a charred and blackened corpse. Ven's quarry was a remote spot far from any human habitation, though actually only 2 miles as the crow flies from Dannemouth. The approach to it was by one of these narrow, twisted, rutted roads, little more than a cart track, which led nowhere except to the quarry itself. It was a long time now since the quarry had been worked, and the only people who came along the lane were the casual visitors in search of blackberries. As a spot to dispose of a car, it was ideal. The car need not have been found for weeks but for the accident of the glow in the sky having been seen by Albert Biggs, a laborer on his way to work. Albert Biggs was still on the scene, though all he had to tell had been heard some time ago, but he continued to repeat the thrilling story with such embellishments as occurred to him. "Why, dang my eyes," I said, "whatever be that? Proper glow it was up in the sky. Might be a bonfire," I says, "but who'd be having bonfire over to Ven's quarry? No," I says, "'tis some mighty big fire to be sure, but whatever would it be?" I says. "There's no house or farm to that direction. 'Tis over by Ven's," I says. "That's where it is to be sure." Didn't rightly know what I ought to do about it, but seeing as Constable Gregg comes along just then on his bicycle, I tells him about it. 'Twas all died down by then, but I tells him just where 'twere. "'Tis over that direction," I says. "Big glare in the sky," I says. "Mayhap it's not a rick," I says. "One of them tramps, as likely as not, set a light of it, but I didn't ever think as how it might be a car, far less as someone was being burnt up alive in it. 'Tis a terrible tragedy, to be sure." The Glenshire police had been busy. Cameras had clicked, and the position of the charred body had been carefully noted before the police surgeon had started his own investigation. The latter came over now to Harper, dusting black ash off his hands. Sorry. His lips set grimly together. "A pretty thorough job," he said. "Part of 1 foot and shoe are about all that has escaped. Personally, I myself couldn't say if the body was a man's or a woman's at the moment, though we'll get some indication from the bones, I expect. But the shoe is one of the black strapped affairs, the kind schoolgirls wear." "There's a schoolgirl missing from the next county," said Harper. "Quite close to here, girl of 16 or so." "Then it's probably her," said the doctor. "Poor kid." Harper said uneasily, "She wasn't alive when—" No, I don't think so. No signs of her having tried to get out. Body was just slumped down on the seat with the foot sticking out. She was dead when she was put there, I should say. Then the car was set fire in order to try and get rid of the evidence." He paused and asked, "Want me any longer?" "I don't think so, thank you. Right, I'll be off." He strode away to his car. Harper went over to where one of his sergeants, a man who specialized in car cases, was busy. The latter looked up. "Quite a clear case, sir. Petrol poured over the car, and the whole thing deliberately set light to. There are 3 empty cans in the hedge over there." A little farther away, another man was carefully arranging small objects picked out of the wreckage. There was a scorched black leather shoe, with it some scraps of scorched and blackened material. As Harper approached, his subordinate looked up and exclaimed, "Look at this, sir. This seems to clinch it." Harper took the small object in his hand. He said, "Buttoned from a Girl Guide's uniform." That's who's missing. "Yes, sir." "Yes," said Harper, "that does seem to settle it. A decent, kindly man, he felt slightly sick. First Ruby Keene, and now this child, Pamela Reeves. He said to himself, as he had said before, what's come to Glenshire? His next move was first to ring up his own chief constable and afterwards to get in touch with Colonel Melchett. The disappearance of Pamela Reeves had taken place in Radfordshire, though her body had been found in Glenshire. The next task set him was not a pleasant one. He had to break the news to Pamela Reeves' father and mother. Superintendent Harper looked up, considering at the facade of Braeside as he rang the front doorbell. Neat little villa, nice garden of about 1.5 acres, the sort of place that had been built fairly freely all over the countryside in the last 20 years. Retired army men, retired civil servants, that type. Nice, decent folk. The worst you could say of them was that they might be a bit dull. Spent as much money as they could afford on their children's education. Not the kind of people you associated with tragedy, and now tragedy had come to them. He sighed. He was shown at once into a lounge where a stiff man with a gray mustache and a woman whose eyes were red with weeping both sprang up. Miss Reeves cried out eagerly, "You have some news of Pamela?" Then she shrank back as though the superintendent's commiserating glance had been a blow. Harper said, "I'm afraid you must prepare yourself for bad news." "Pamela," faltered the woman. Major Reeves said sharply, "Something's happened to the child?" "Yes, sir." "Do you mean she's dead?" Mrs. Reeves burst out, "Oh, no, no," and broke into a storm of weeping. Major Reeves put his arm around his wife and drew her to him. His lips trembled, but he looked inquiringly at Harper, who bent his head. "An accident?" "Not exactly, Major Reeves. She was found in a burnt-out car which had been abandoned in a quarry." "In a car? In a quarry?" His astonishment was evident. Mrs. Reeves broke down altogether and sank down on the sofa, sobbing violently. Superintendent Harper said, "If you'd like me to wait a few minutes." Major Reeves said sharply, "What does this mean? Foul play?" "That's what it looks like, sir. That's why I'd like to ask you some questions, if it isn't too trying for you." "No, no, you're quite right. No time must be lost, if what you suggest is true, but I can't believe it. Who would want to harm a child like Pamela?" Harper said stolidly, "You've already reported to your local police the circumstances of your daughter's disappearance. She left here to attend a guides rally, and you expected her home for supper. That's right?" "Yes." "She was to return by bus?" "Yes." "I understand that according to the story of her fellow guides, when the rally was over, Pamela said she was going into Dannemouth to Woolworth's and would catch a later bus home. That strikes you as quite a normal proceeding?" "Oh, yes. Pamela was very fond of going to Woolworth. She often went into Dannemouth to shop. The bus goes from the main road only about 1/4 mile from here." "And she had no other plans so far as you know?" "None." "She was not meeting anybody in Dannemouth?" "No, I'm sure she wasn't. She would have mentioned it if so. We expected her back for supper. That's why, when it got so late and she hadn't turned up, we rang up the police. It wasn't like her not to come home." "Your daughter had no undesirable friends, that is, friends that you didn't approve of?" "No, there was never any trouble of that kind." Mrs. Reeves said tearfully, "Pam was just a child. She was very young for her age. She liked games and all that. She wasn't precocious in any way." "Do you know a Mr. George Bartlett who was staying at the Majestic Hotel in Dannemouth?" Major Reeves stared. "Never heard of him." "You don't think your daughter knew him?" "I'm quite sure she didn't." He added sharply, "How does he come into it?" "He's the owner of the Minowan 2014 car in which your daughter's body was found." Mrs. Reeves cried. "But then he must—" Harper said quickly. "He reported his car missing early today. It was in the courtyard of the Majestic Hotel at lunchtime yesterday. Anybody might have taken the car." "But didn't someone see who took it?" The superintendent shook his head. "Dozens of cars going in and out all day, and a Minoan 14 is one of the commonest makes," Mrs. Reeves cried. "But aren't you doing something? Aren't you trying to find the devil who did this? My little girl, oh, my little girl. She wasn't burned alive, was she? Oh, Pam, Pam." "She didn't suffer, Mrs. Reeves, I assure you. She was already dead when the car was set alight." Reeves asked stiffly, "How was she killed?" Harper gave him a significant glance. "We don't know. The fire had destroyed all evidence of that kind." He turned to the distraught woman on the sofa. "Believe me, Mrs. Reeves, we're doing everything we can. It's a matter of checking up. Sooner or later we shall find someone who saw your daughter in Denimouth yesterday and saw whom she was with. It all takes time, you know. We shall have dozens, hundreds of reports coming in about a girl guide who was seen here, there, and everywhere. It's a matter of selection and of patience, but we shall find out the truth in the end, never you fear." Mrs. Reeves asked, Where is she? Can I go to her?" Again, Superintendent Harper caught the husband's eye. He said, "The medical officer is attending to all that. I suggest that your husband come with me now and attends to all the formalities. In the meantime, try and recollect anything Pam might have said. Something, perhaps, that you didn't pay attention to at the time, but which might throw some light upon things. You know what I mean, just some chance word or phrase. That's the best way you can help us. As the two men went towards the door, Reeves said, pointing to a photograph, "There she is." Harper looked at it attentively. It was a hockey group. Reeves pointed out Pamela in the center of the team. A nice kid, Harper thought, as he looked at the earnest face of the pigtailed girl. His mouth set in a grim line as he thought of the charred body in the car. He vowed to himself that the murder of Pamela Reeves should not remain one of Glenshire's unsolved mysteries. Ruby Keene, so he admitted privately, might have asked for what was coming to her, but Pamela Reeves was quite another story. A nice kid if ever he saw one. He'd not rest until he had hunted down the man or woman who'd killed her. And that's all of 10. And I would read more, but some of my people are on now. I think my YT daughter Kim from Kim's Crochet and Knits is live right now. And also the Yarn Hookers live. Okay, I'll see y'all later. Be sweet, don't be ugly. Love you bunches. Bye.